At my father's funeral, right as the priest was offering a prayer over his casket, the family attorney leaned in and whispered just loud enough for me and my sister to hear. "Your father left behind $75 million. Your mother gets nothing." I remember the sound of my heartbeat more than I remember the rest of that day. It wasn't the money. It was the way everything shifted in that instant. My name is Nathan Carter. I'm 31. Architect, brother, son. And up until that moment, I thought I knew who my father was. Richard Carter had always been a quiet, deliberate man. Woke up before the sun, fixed the porch himself when it squeaked, paid cash, drove a rusted Ford truck long past its prime. He built our home with his own hands. He said little, but what he did say always landed like scripture. So when I heard the word $75 million, it felt like the world tilted on its axis. I looked over at my mother, Margaret, her face frozen in polite grief. She didn't know, I could tell, and my sister Elena. Her eyes didn't blink, just this strange calm in her expression, like maybe this wasn't news to her at all. I couldn't breathe. See, we weren't the kind of family that talked about money. Dad was frugal to the bone. I assumed he had a modest retirement fund, maybe some savings from the construction firm he owned quietly for decades. But millions multiple. That was a different universe. And the will, the damn will, it didn't just shake us, it detonated something. Dad left nearly everything to me and Elena. No mention of Mom, not even the house they'd lived in together for 30 years. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a clerical error, a draft, something left unsigned, something that could be reversed, but it wasn't. It was real, signed, witnessed, notarized. In that single moment, my father's death stopped being a tragedy and became a mystery, a dangerous one, and no one, not even family, would leave untouched by the secrets it would expose. The night after the funeral, the house felt heavier than ever before. We sat in the living room, me, my sister Elena, and my mother Margaret. The fireplace crackled quietly, casting long shadows on the floor Dad used to polish every Sunday morning, but no warmth came from it. The silence was unbearable. Then Mom finally said it, not with a scream, but a whisper that sounded like betrayal bleeding through her teeth. "He left me nothing." I nodded slowly. She blinked, stunned. "Not even the house. No, Mom. It's all in our names." She didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, she leaned back like something deep inside her spine had cracked. And then she laughed. Just once. A hollow, brittle laugh that didn't touch her eyes. "I was married to that man for 30 years. I raised his children. I stood by him through debt lawsuits, his silent seasons when he barely said a word, and he just erases me." It was the first time I saw my mother, not as the calm, gentle figure who made homemade biscuits and sang off-key in the kitchen, but as someone suddenly exiled from her own life. And Elena, well, she didn't say much at all. She just stared at the firearms folded, jaw clenched like someone waiting for a storm they'd already prepared for. "Did you know?" I asked her quietly when Mom stepped out of the room. She turned toward me slow. "Know what? About the will, the money, any of it?" She didn't answer right away. She looked down, then back at me. "I knew Dad had more than he let on," she admitted. "He took me on a trip last year, to Miami and then elsewhere. We stayed at places he never would have booked when we were kids. He told me things about accounts, investments, about not trusting everyone." I felt something turn cold in my stomach. "You're saying he planned this?" She shook her head. "No, I'm saying he was protecting something, or someone. I just never imagined he'd cut Mom out completely. But the damage was already setting in. That night I heard my mom on the phone in the kitchen. Not with a friend, with a lawyer. She was calling Jerome Hale, the same attorney who had read us the will. Her voice was shaky but firm. "I need a copy of the original draft," she said. "The first version. Before it was changed." That's when I knew. This wasn't grief anymore. This was war. By morning, our home, the one Dad built, felt like contested land. Mom no longer looked lost. She looked determined. She pulled out folders, birth certificates, marriage license, old tax returns. He couldn't have made this kind of money without me noticing. She muttered, rifling through papers, unless he wanted to hide it. She wasn't wrong. Richard Carter was not a flashy man, but he was meticulous. He didn't just stumble into $75 million. He built it. Quietly. Deliberately. And apparently he hid it. Mom called it betrayal. I called it a secret. A buried truth we'd only started to uncover. Elena. She called it something else. Dad didn't believe in emotional decisions, she said sharply over breakfast. Maybe he thought this was cleaner, safer, legal. That doesn't make it betrayal. Are you defending this? I snapped. I'm trying to understand it. Well, try harder, Elena, Mom cut in, her voice cracking. Because the man you're trying to understand just erased me from everything we built. What followed was the kind of silence that doesn't go away easily. The kind that hangs in the walls, seeps into the furniture. And then came the letter. 3 days later, it arrived in a flat envelope with no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a bank statement, an account in the Cayman Islands under the name RC Holdings. Balance, $12.4 million. It wasn't in the estate paperwork. It wasn't listed in the will. But the signature on the account, it was my father's. That discovery set off something like an earthquake in our family. Mom accused Elena of knowing and hiding the truth. Elena denied it, but wouldn't say where they went on that trip last year. I stood between them, trying to keep either side from exploding. I'm filing a formal contest, Mom told me in the hallway that night. This isn't just about money. It's about trust. Your father betrayed me, and if I have to go to court to prove it, I will. I couldn't argue. Not fully. Because I didn't know who to believe anymore. I started reading Dad's emails, the ones saved in the old desktop in his study. One stood out. It was a draft never sent, to Nathan Carter, subject. When I'm gone. If you're reading this, then I didn't get to explain it in time. Just know what I built wasn't just for wealth. It was to protect you. All of you. Even if you don't see it yet. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. He wasn't just gone. He left a trail of questions behind, ones that might just destroy what was left of us if we weren't careful. And we were not careful. The petition was filed 2 weeks after the funeral. Margaret Carter is the estate of Richard A. Carter. It was official now. Legal. Public. Cold. I showed up to the first hearing, dressed in a suit that suddenly felt too stiff for the man I used to be. Sitting next to my mother, I watched the judge scan over the motion with a blank expression. Across the courtroom, Elena sat with her own attorney, back straight, face unreadable. The room smelled like old paper and polished wood, but what filled it was the weight of everything unsaid between us. Mom argued the will had been signed under duress, or worse, that Dad wasn't of sound mind when he signed it. Elena's lawyer pushed back, stating clearly, Richard Carter was competent, aware, and in full control of his faculties until the day he died. The judge ordered a continuance, and just like that, our grief turned into paperwork. Depositions, discovery, and headlines. 3 days later, our family name hit the news. Wife sues. Own children over mysterious $75,000 fortune left by modest builder. The article ran with an old photo of Dad in his work boots. Hammer slung over his shoulder, smiling beside the frame of the house he built for us in '98. Below it, a quote from a neighbor. Rick was the most humble guy on the block. We had no idea he was sitting on millions. None of us did. Reporters started circling. A camera van parked outside the house for 2 days straight. Someone sent Mom a microphone through the mail. Just in case you want to share your side, the note said. She tossed it in the trash without a word. But worse than the press were the leaks. Within days, journalists had their hands on portions of the estate documents. They found the shell companies, the property holdings in Utah and Arizona, a real estate investment firm in Colorado, registered to RAC Enterprises, offshore trust accounts, Every time a new detail surfaced, it added fuel to a fire we didn't know how to contain. Mom became even more resolute. Every headline that painted her as bitter widow or disgruntled wife only sharpened her focus. And Elena, she just kept pulling away. I texted her, "You okay?" She didn't answer for a day. Then finally, define okay. We met up in secret, no press, no lawyers. She was tired, pale, carrying the weight of something she hadn't said yet. I didn't know about the properties she whispered, stirring her coffee without drinking it. But I knew he was planning something. I leaned forward, planning what Elena. She looked at me, and for the first time since this started, I saw fear. Dad didn't trust people, not even Mom. I wanted to scream, but all I did was ask, "Why?" Elena swallowed hard. He said she used to open his mail, watch his emails, ask questions about things she didn't understand. I flinched. You mean she cared? I mean she wanted control. That sat between us like a loaded gun. Back at the house, Mom was preparing for the next round. She'd hired forensic accountants, and they were digging deep, deeper than I ever thought possible. That's when they found Travis Monroe, Dad's former business partner. A man none of us had heard of, until his name came up in connection with a failed contracting company in Nevada, one that collapsed under accusations of tax fraud and offshore laundering. There was no proof linking Dad to illegal activity. But there were overlaps, signatures, wire transfers, dated 3 years ago. Mom seized on that. He knew he was hiding something. That's why he kept me out. He thought if I was written in, I'd expose everything. The tension exploded at the next court session. Mom accused Elena of collaborating. Elena accused Mom of paranoia. And I just stood there, useless, after court reporters swarmed. Do you believe the will was altered? Is your sister hiding money offshore? What was your father really worth? I didn't answer. I couldn't. That night I sat in Dad's old office. The chair still creaked the same way. The smell of cedar hadn't faded. But the man who once occupied this space, I didn't know him anymore. He'd left behind more than a fortune. He'd left a minefield. Emails continued to surface. One thread titled "Alternate Trustee" revealed he'd once considered giving power of attorney to someone outside the family. A man named Stephen Lorne, a financial advisor in San Diego. He'd apparently helped structure the offshore accounts. Mom brought him in for deposition. He looked calm, slick, like the type of man who could bury secrets under piles of paper and smile while doing it. When asked why Margaret wasn't included in the estate, his answer was sharp. Mr. Carter believed his wife didn't have the temperament for complex financial management. Margaret's hands clenched so tightly, I thought she'd break her own fingers. In the following weeks, my phone never stopped buzzing. Old friends from high school suddenly wanted to catch up. Charities sent personalized letters asking for donations in honor of your father's legacy. One even sent a plaque in advance already engraved. It made me sick. This wasn't grief anymore. It was spectacle. Elena tried to play neutral, but her silence looked like complicity. And Mom, she was becoming unrecognizable. The warmth that once defined her turned to steel. She said things like, "If I have to burn this whole thing down to get justice, I will." And honestly, I believed her. But the worst came when a local news anchor showed up at the courthouse with a copy of an unsigned second will, one that named Margaret Carter as equal beneficiary. It was dated 6 months before the one that cut her out. The ink was real. The signature, a close match, but not identical. Forensics were inconclusive. The court ruled it inadmissible. Still, that sliver of doubt was enough to reopen wounds no judge could close. Everything spiraled. Mom filed a restraining order against Elena after a fight broke out over access to Dad's old safe. Elena moved out of town. I stopped answering calls altogether. I used to think the worst part of losing my father would be the grief. I was wrong. The worst part was realizing I'd never really known him, and that whatever legacy he left behind wasn't wealth. It was wreckage. ChatGPT said the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras tucked away, but their eyes locked in. Family friends sat stiffly along the benches, not making eye contact. Even the judge looked heavier that morning, like he knew what was coming wasn't just another estate dispute. It was something deeper, messier. We were all dressed in black again, not for mourning, but for war. Margaret Carter. My mother was called to the stand first. Her heels echoed against the polished floor as she walked forward, spine-straight hands clenched around a tissue she hadn't yet used. She took the oath, sat, looked straight ahead. The questioning started gently. Her marriage, her memories, her role as a mother, a wife, a partner in Richard Carter's life. He was a good man, she said. Quiet, dependable. We didn't talk about money much, but I always thought that was just his way. The lawyer leaned in. Did he ever give you access to his financial records? No. Did you ask? Once, maybe twice. He said, you don't need to worry about that stuff, Max. So I didn't. She paused. Her voice dropped a little. But now I wish I had. The room felt still. You could hear every chair creak. Did you know about the offshore accounts? No. I didn't even know about the properties in Utah, or that he still had any stake in Monroe Development. I found out from a reporter. And how did that make you feel? Mom didn't answer at first. Then she blinked back a tear, like I'd been erased. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, I loved my husband, but I refused to believe that a man who promised to build a life with me would die and leave me with nothing but questions. When she stepped down, I could barely breathe. Then they called Elena. She looked calm, like always, hair neatly tied back, a navy blue suit that made her look older than 27. She walked to the witness stand with a confidence that used to comfort me until it started feeling like armor. Her attorney opened gently. Elena, did your father ever express concern about your mother's ability to handle large sums of money? She hesitated. Yes, she finally said. But not because he thought she wasn't intelligent. He said she panicked, that she made emotional decisions when logic was needed. And what did he want? He wanted security. For everyone. He said sometimes protecting people meant not including them. I watched my mother's face collapse from across the room. Her jaw tightened, her breath sharp and shallow. Elena didn't flinch. The prosecution attorney stepped forward, now sharper. Elena, were you aware of your father's foreign investments? I was aware he was diversifying assets. Did he ask you to keep that information from your mother? A pause. Yes. Gasps rippled through the room. The attorney leaned in. Do you believe your father was of sound mind when he changed the wills? I do. Do you believe he loved your mother? Elena closed her eyes for a second. I believe he thought he was doing what was best, even if it hurt. The room was silent again. Then the judge called me. I hadn't prepared anything. I didn't want to testify. But when your name is spoken into a microphone in a room where your family is burning alive, you don't sit back and watch. I took the oath. Sat down. My palms were already sweating. Mr. Carter, how would you describe your father? The words came slowly. He was precise, private, kind, but hard to know. He taught me how to drive, how to rebuild a fence, but never how to prepare for this. Did you ever talk to your father about his financial legacy? No. Did you know about the accounts, the shell companies, the properties? No. I looked at both my mother and sister before I continued. But I know he didn't do this to punish anyone. I think he believed he was solving something we hadn't even realized was broken. The attorney frowned. Broken. Our trust, our understanding of each other. I don't think he intended for us to fight over what he left behind. I think he hoped we'd figure out how to honor it together. I paused, then added, but if that was his plan, it failed. The judge asked if I had anything else to add. I reached into my pocket, a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly. I found this in his toolbox. He left it in a Ziploc bag labeled, just in case. It's not legally binding, I know that. But maybe it says more than the will did. I read it aloud. Nathan, if you're reading this, you're probably angry. That's okay. I didn't always do things the right way. I made decisions in silence because I didn't know how to say what I needed out loud. What I built wasn't for pride or power. It was to give you and Elena something solid so you could live lighter than I did. I didn't leave your mother out because I stopped loving her. I left her out because I was afraid she'd fight what I wanted. And I didn't want to lose her while I was alive. Turns out, I lost her anyway. Don't let the money define you. Let the truth shape you. Love, Dad. The judge didn't react. Judges aren't allowed to. But something shifted in the room. A silence hung like fog over everyone's heads. The attorney nodded. No further questions. I stepped down. The air felt thinner. Outside, cameras were still flashing. But inside me, something finally cracked wide open. Because for the first time since this began, I didn't just miss my father. I resented him. Not for dying, but for leaving us with a puzzle that didn't have a clean solution. A legacy that asked us to choose between truth and loyalty, between facts and faith. And we were failing that choice. Every day. 2 days after the testimony, just when we thought the courtroom had revealed every possible fracture, something new surfaced quietly, and in the form of a man who didn't belong there. He was tall gray at the temples, wearing an unremarkable navy suit and wire-rimmed glasses. He sat in the back row during the hearing, without saying a word. After the judge adjourned for the day, he approached Mr. Hale, our family attorney, and handed him an envelope. "I think it's time," the man said. "Rick would have wanted this told properly." Mr. Hale opened the envelope right there in the courthouse lobby. Inside were 6 typed pages, a thumb drive, and a business card that made my stomach knot up. Travis Monroe, former co-founder of Carter and Monroe Contracting. A name that until that moment had been whispered in legal documents but never connected out loud. Mr. Hale's eyes narrowed. "You sure you want to go on record?" Monroe nodded. "I owe him that much." That evening we gathered in Hale's office, me mom Elena, and our respective counsel. No reporters, no court recorders, just a locked room and the weight of what we were about to hear. Monroe sat at the edge of his chair, holding his hat in both hands, like a man about to confess at church. "I met Rick in '94, he began. "We were both building contractors, just scraping by. Shared a vision, started a firm. Carter and Monroe. It was supposed to be equal 50-50. He looked down, but over time, Rick wanted something cleaner. He didn't like how some of our clients operated. The cash-only deals, the handshake promises. Especially when some of those clients started getting investigated. Mom's eyebrows shot up. Investigated for laundering, embezzlement, the usual dirt. Monroe continued. "Rick told me he wanted out. Said he was going to buy me out quietly and disappear. Start something new under a shell company, keep his name off paperwork, and protect his family." He slid the thumb drive across the table. "These are emails, contracts, proof. Rick wasn't hiding money from you, Margaret. He was hiding it from the IRS, from dirty contractors, from former partners who threatened him when he walked away." Elena leaned forward. "Are you saying Dad was in danger?" Monroe nodded, eyes tired. "There were threats. Real ones. That's why he moved some assets offshore. Not because he didn't trust you, but because if anything happened to him, he didn't want your names anywhere on the trail." A heavy silence dropped over the room, like a lead curtain. Mom stared at him, her voice low. "Then why didn't he tell me?" "Because he didn't think you'd understand," Monroe said gently. "Rick loved you, but he also knew you saw the world in black and white. He lived in the gray." I saw Mom flinch just barely, but she didn't speak again. Mr. Hale opened the file on the thumb drive and pulled up an encrypted folder. Inside were balance sheets, contracts, memos, and a letter addressed to Monroe dated 2 months before Dad died. "If anything happens to me," it read, "don't let them assume the worst. Tell the truth, all of it, even if it costs them the illusion I worked so hard to maintain." That line hit me like a brick, because that's exactly what we'd been clinging to, an illusion. A simple man with a toolbox and dusty boots. A father who grilled burgers on Sundays and gave vague nods instead of long speeches. But beneath that was someone else. someone who had enemies. Secrets. A shadow life we never saw coming. Mom looked shattered. The betrayal hadn't gone away, it had simply evolved, changed shape. She wasn't cut out, she was protected. But the result felt the same. I could have helped him, she whispered. I would have helped him. Monroe nodded. I believe that. Rick didn't. And maybe that's where he failed you. Elena looked stunned. Why now? Why come forward? Monroe met her eyes. Because your mother was about to destroy everything he built, trying to prove a lie. And because the truth, hard as it is still cleaner than fiction. Mr. Hale stood. This changes things. He was right. The court might not accept Monroe's word as law. But the digital trail was real. The contracts were signed. The money traced. Dad wasn't just a secretive man. He was a man who built a fortress in the dark, hoping the ones he loved would never have to see what he'd done to protect them. And now we were standing in the rubble of that fortress, trying to decide if we'd rebuild or burn what was left. I thought we'd uncovered the final layer. I thought Travis Monroe's confession was the last dark corner of my father's hidden life. But I was wrong. 1 week after Monroe stepped forward, I came across something that cracked everything wide open again. It started with a memory, something simple. I remembered a photo Elena had shown me last year. A beach, a rooftop dinner. Her smiling with a mojito in her hand, sunset behind her. I'd assumed it was Miami, but the location tag embedded in the image data said something else. Georgetown, Grand Cayman. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Elena had told me she took a quiet trip with Dad to clear his head after he sold off one of his smaller companies. She made it sound harmless, even sweet. But now with everything we'd learned, that detail hit differently. I couldn't let it go. I dug into the old photos again, ones she'd shared via our family cloud. Found one of her boarding a private charter jet. Another with Dad standing near a conference room window with unfamiliar men in suits. The timestamps didn't lie. The trip happened 2 months before Dad updated his will. I didn't want to believe it. So I asked, Elena, I said, cornering her in the driveway of our childhood home, what really happened in the Caymans? She stiffened, eyes locked on mine. Why are you asking now? Because I think you know more than you've admitted. I think Dad brought you there for a reason, and I think you've been keeping it from me and from Mom. She didn't speak at first. Then finally she said, he made me sign documents. My stomach turned. What kind of documents? She looked down. Her voice dropped. Trust forms. Authorization papers. He needed someone he trusted to be listed as a secondary beneficiary and executor in case something went wrong. It was all legal. But he swore me to secrecy. Elena, you're not just a witness, you're a participant. Why didn't you say anything? Because it wasn't about money, she snapped. It was about protection. Dad didn't trust lawyers with all of it. He didn't trust you with it. Not because he didn't love you, but because you asked too many questions and take too long to decide anything. He needed action. I gave him that. I was speechless. Do you know how that makes you sound? She didn't flinch, like someone who followed her father's dying wish. I shook my head. No, like someone who thought she knew better than the rest of us. That night I pulled out a storage drive from Dad's safe that we hadn't fully examined. Encrypted folders again, only this time inside one labeled personal. I found audio files, dictations he recorded in the months leading up to his death. I clicked the first one. Elena handled the Grand Cayman account better than I expected. She asked tough questions, didn't flinch. I think she'll keep things steady if I'm gone, but I worry Nathan will take it personally. He sees transparency as love. I see it as a vulnerability. I couldn't breathe. I skipped to another. Margaret. Still watches the mail. I know she means well. But I can't tell her about the offshore move. If she finds out, she'll make me undo it, and that could put everything at risk. And then, one final clip. I hate this. I hate that I can't tell my own wife what I'm doing. But I also hate the thought of her getting dragged into something if this all goes south. Elena will understand. Nathan will forgive me. Eventually, that word felt like a blade. When I confronted Elena again this time with the recordings, she didn't deny it. I was going to tell you after the court settled, after Mom stopped trying to fight everything. I just didn't want to blow it all up. You already did, I said. You just did it quietly. We stood in silence for what felt like hours. Then she whispered, "Do you think I'm the villain in this?" I looked at her, the sister I used to trust with everything, and I said the only honest thing I could. I don't know anymore. The next court session was chaos. The revelation about Elena's involvement with Dad's accounts led to a formal review. Not just of the will, but of her potential conflict of interest as beneficiary and secondary executor. Mom's legal team went on the offensive. They painted Elena as a co-conspirator, someone who influenced Dad's decisions, controlled his finances behind closed doors, and helped hide assets for personal gain. Elena's lawyer argued she was acting on instructions, that she didn't benefit inappropriately, that everything she did was fully documented and in line with Richard Carter's intentions. But none of that erased the perception. The press devoured it. Daughter in the shadows. Did Elena Carter control the Carter fortune? Before her father's death, she stopped showing up in public, deleted her social media, moved to a rental property in a different county. And our relationship, barely breathing. We used to share everything. Now all we shared was silence. But the worst part, the truly agonizing part, was knowing she did it out of loyalty. Not greed, not malice, just conviction. She believed she was doing the right thing. And maybe in some twisted way, she was. But in keeping the truth from us, she didn't just protect Dad's legacy. She destroyed the one we were supposed to build together. The verdict came on a rainy Tuesday morning. We arrived at the courthouse soaked and silent, umbrellas dripping, and clothes clinging to our skin like the weight of everything we dragged in with us. No cameras this time, no reporters leaning in through hedges. Just the cold air of finality waiting inside. The courtroom was still. Even the judge looked heavier, like the emotional toll of this case had aged everyone involved. He shuffled papers, adjusted his glasses, and cleared his throat before he spoke. "This matter has been long and difficult," he began. Voice slow, deliberate. "Not simply for the court, but for the family at the heart of it." I felt my mother tense beside me. Elena, 3 rows back, didn't move. The judge continued. "While the last will and testament of Richard A. Carter is legally valid under state law, the surrounding circumstances, particularly new evidence, offshore account documentation and testimony from involved parties, have revealed a pattern of omission and intent that the court cannot in good conscience ignore." I didn't know what that meant yet, but it sounded different. Then came the ruling. The estate shall not be divided as originally stated. A beat. The court orders a redistribution of assets as follows. He listed it piece by piece. Margaret Carter. My mother would receive 25% of the total estate, including proceeds from liquidated real estate business holdings and offshore accounts, now validated and absorbed into the probate process. Not just as a nod to her marriage, but in acknowledgement of her unrecognized emotional and domestic labor across 3 decades. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't cry. She just bowed her head and finally let herself exhale. Elena would retain a significant portion, but with oversight. A portion of her inheritance, nearly 20%, would be placed in a managed trust, accessible only under conditions related to transparency, financial reporting, and charitable impact. The room shifted slightly. Not punishment, but boundaries. And me. The judge cleared his throat again. Nathan Carter will be appointed estate overseer and family trust manager, tasked with ensuring compliance with the court's distribution terms and with maintaining equitable support for all beneficiaries. I froze. This role is both legal and personal, he added, and it requires not only fiduciary responsibility, but emotional maturity. It felt like the air had been knocked out of me. It wasn't a reward, it was a responsibility, a burden, an olive branch, a challenge. Then, just as he was about to close the session, the judge paused, looked over his glasses, looked at us. "This courtroom cannot resolve your grief," he said softly. "Nor can it repair the damage done by years of miscommunication, silence, and secrecy." He picked up one final document. "But this court does believe healing is possible." He held up a letter, apparently submitted privately by Mr. Hale. It was from my father, not part of the will, not part of the trust. Just a note signed, dated, typed out on the same old typewriter he kept in the garage. To whomever receives this, it read, "My only regret is leaving behind a family unsure of itself. If you can find a way back to one another, it'll be worth more than anything I've left behind." With that, the judge issued a final condition: court-mandated family counseling, minimum of 6 sessions. Together, no legal advisors, no media, no excuses. At first, no one reacted. Then slowly, I saw something shift in my mother's face. Not resistance, not anger. Just fatigue, giving way to possibility. As we stood to leave, Elena caught my eye for the first time in weeks. She didn't smile, but she nodded. It was small, almost nothing, but in our language, the one built before secrets and signatures, that was everything. Outside, the rain had stopped. For the first time in a long time, we walked out of the courthouse without flinching at the sky. ChatGPT said the counseling session started awkwardly. We sat in a beige office with tissue boxes strategically placed in every corner. A whiteboard on the wall read "Progress over perfection." None of us wanted to be there, but none of us left either. The first session, no one spoke. The second, we argued. The third, something cracked. It wasn't dramatic. No breakdowns, no screaming confessions. Just a moment when my mother mid-sentence stopped and said quietly, "I think I was angrier at the silence than the money." That stayed with me, because all this time we thought the wound was about the will, the accounts, the inheritance. But the real pain was never about numbers. It was about being left in the dark. And over time, as we unpacked that truth, other realizations began to surface. We learned that secrets, even ones meant to protect, can still cause harm. My father hid his intentions, his fears, and his plans not out of cruelty, but out of a misguided belief that silence was strength, that shielding us from stress was the same as showing love. It wasn't. Love without transparency becomes distance, and distance left unchecked becomes distrust. We learned that trust isn't built by sharing good news. It's built by walking through hard truths together. For years, we functioned like most families, assuming love meant understanding, and understanding meant agreement. But when the storm hit, we realized how fragile our foundation really was. In those therapy chairs, we confronted the patterns we never questioned. Mom's need for control when everything else felt uncertain. Elena's habit of carrying burdens alone, convinced no one else could hold them. My tendency to stand in the middle, hoping balance would fix what communication never addressed. And we started to unlearn those roles. We also learned the difference between inheritance and legacy. The money, that $75 million fortune, had once felt like a curse wrapped in legal tape. But slowly, it became a tool. Not for power, but for purpose. We decided to create something together. Not out of guilt, not out of PR, but out of healing. We established the Richard A. Carter Foundation, focused on vocational education and trade scholarships for young builders, architects, and technicians from underrepresented communities. Dad never went to college, but he built things with his hands. He built homes. He built safety. And somewhere inside that complex private man, he wanted others to have that chance too. Every time we meet a student who got one of those scholarships, we remember that even in silence, my father was trying to say something. Now we help him finish the sentence. But maybe the most valuable lesson was this: your family is immune to fracture. But every family has a choice to live in the cracks or to rebuild. We chose to rebuild. We don't pretend everything's perfect now. There are days when things still sting. Days when Mom won't bring up Elena's name at dinner. Days when I wonder if I'll ever stop hearing my dad's voice in my head explaining what he did and why he never told me. But there are also new days, days when we laugh again, when we argue about what to cook for Thanksgiving instead of what's written in a trust document, when we talk about the future, not the past. I used to think a father's legacy was what he left behind. Now I know it's what you do with what he left behind. Money fades, property depreciates. Even signatures eventually fade on paper, but healing has staying power. And every time we choose truth over assumption, conversation over silence, forgiveness over pride, we honor him. Not just the man he was, but the family he tried flawed as he was to hold together. Last week, we stood together, me, Mom, and Elena, on the steps of a newly opened trade school in Detroit. It was the first site funded entirely by the Richard A. Carter Foundation. There was no press, no ribbon-cutting spectacle, just the three of us. Watching a group of students walk into a building my father would have been proud to help create. Mom reached for Elena's hand, held it. No words, just a grip that said more than any apology ever could. I looked at both of them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't see a fractured family. I saw a new shape, imperfect but honest. Not healed, maybe, but healing. As we left, Elena asked if we could get lunch. Just the three of us, like we used to. Mom smiled. I'd like that. We didn't fix everything. We still carry scars, but we also carry something stronger now. Clarity and choice. We didn't choose how the story began, but we do get to choose how it continues. And maybe, just maybe, that's where the real legacy lives.